The night my husband walked his girlfriend through our front door, my mother-in-law looked me dead in the eye and told me my daughter and I could sleep in the garage if I planned on making a scene. I still remember the sound of rain hammering the gutters that night. Hard rain. Alabama summer rain. The kind that smells like hot pavement and rotting leaves. It was 8:22 in the evening because I looked at the microwave clock the second Dale walked through the front door with that girl trailing behind him. At first I honestly assumed she was a customer. Maybe somebody needing emergency air conditioning repair. Dale owned a small HVAC company outside Huntsville, and people called him at strange hours constantly. Then I noticed the coral pink suitcase and the way she smiled at him. Not nervous. Not embarrassed. Comfortable. Like she had already been inside my house before. Dale shut the door behind them and shook rainwater off his boots onto the floor I'd mopped that morning. "Rhonda," he said casually. "We need to talk." That sentence alone can make a woman physically ill after 23 years of marriage. I stood there holding a dish towel while spaghetti boiled behind me on the stove. Maddie was in the living room doing homework on the coffee table with that battered stuffed otter she'd carried since kindergarten tucked under her arm. The girl stepped forward and gave me this tiny little wave. "Hi. I'm Shelby. 27 years old maybe. Long caramel hair, white acrylic nails, too much lip gloss. Pretty in that polished social media way." Then Dale said the sentence that split my life clean down the middle. "Shelby's going to stay here for a while." I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because my brain flatly refused to process what I had just heard. "What?" Dale sighed like I was already being difficult. "Don't start yelling." "Dale," I said slowly. "Who is this woman?" Before he could answer, another voice drifted out from my own kitchen. "Well, somebody has to stay calm tonight." "Corinne." My mother-in-law walked in carrying 2 glasses of sweet tea like this was Sunday supper instead of a public execution. That was the moment I understood this had all been planned. She already knew. Probably for weeks. Maybe considerably longer. Corinne handed 1 glass to Shelby. "Not me. Never me." Dale rubbed the back of his neck. "Rhonda, me and you haven't been happy in a long time." I stared at him. "You brought another woman into my house while your daughter is 10 feet away." 11, Maddie said quietly from the living room. Nobody answered her. Shelby shifted awkwardly and produced that soft fake expression women use when they want credit for pretending to care. "I never meant to hurt anybody." I looked directly at her. "Then you picked a strange way to spend your Thursday night." Dale immediately got irritated. "See? This is exactly what I mean. Everything turns dramatic with you." My mouth actually fell open. For years I had defended this man. When his business struggled, I picked up extra shifts at the dental office. When he fell behind on taxes, I let him refinance my car. When he insisted his stress was temporary, I believed him. And now there was some young woman standing in my kitchen wearing my old Alabama sweatshirt while he spoke to me like I was the problem. Corinne sat down at the table and folded her arms. "Rhonda, honey, nobody's trying to humiliate you." I laughed again, sharper this time. "Well, that's comforting, Corinne, because all of you are doing an incredible job accidentally." Dale exhaled hard through his nose. "Look, Shelby's staying here. I'm not sneaking around anymore. You brought her into our home. It's my house." That one landed exactly the way he intended. The house had belonged to Dale's father before he passed. Legally, it was Dale's inheritance. And Dale knew perfectly well that I worried about that, especially lately because money had been tight for months. I folded the dish towel slowly and set it on the counter. "Tell me something honestly. How long has this been going on?" Nobody answered immediately. Corinne sipped her tea. Finally Shelby spoke. "About 9 months. 9 months. I thought about all the dinners I'd cooked. All the laundry I'd folded. All the nights Dale claimed he was working late. 9 months. Maddie appeared quietly in the hallway clutching her stuffed otter. "Mom." I looked at her face and felt something inside me crack open. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a deep, tired break. Dale noticed her standing there and immediately got annoyed. "Maddie, go back in the living room." "No," I snapped. The room went silent. That surprised everybody, including me. Dale stared at me. "You want to do this in front of her?" "You already did." Rain hammered the windows. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled across the ridge. Corinne stood up carefully like she was trying to manage unstable people. "Everybody needs to cool down." Dale pointed toward the garage door. If you're going to keep acting like this, maybe you and Maddie should sleep out there tonight. I stared at him. I don't think I'll ever forget that moment as long as I live. Not because he said it, but as he meant it. Maddie's eyes filled instantly. That little girl looked terrified. And suddenly I stopped caring about the house or the marriage or winning. I only cared about getting my daughter somewhere safe from the ugliness standing in that kitchen. I walked past Dale without another word. Corinne called after me. Now don't be irrational. I turned around. For 23 years, I said quietly, I cleaned this house, paid bills in this house, raised your granddaughter in this house. And you brought a stranger into it like I was already dead. Corinne opened her mouth. Nothing came out. For once. I went upstairs and started packing. Not suitcases. Trash bags. Because my hands were shaking too badly to do anything properly. Maddie sat on the bed hugging her otter while I shoved clothes into black plastic bags from the laundry room. Mom, she whispered. Are we homeless? I stopped moving. God, that question nearly killed me. I knelt beside her and pushed damp hair away from her face. No, baby, I said softly. We're just leaving a house that forgot how to be a home. Downstairs I could hear Corinne talking in low, nervous tones. Dale already sounded irritated. And Shelby laughed once. Just once. Bright and stupid. I zipped Maddie's backpack myself because her little hands were trembling too hard. Then I grabbed the car keys. When we walked downstairs carrying trash bags, Dale looked genuinely stunned for a second. Like maybe he had expected me to cry and beg instead. You're really leaving? I looked at him. You already left, Dale. Then Maddie and I walked out into the rain. The windshield wipers barely kept up as I drove east through the dark toward Chattanooga. Maddie fell asleep about 40 minutes into the drive with her otter tucked beneath her chin. Somewhere near the Tennessee line I finally started crying so hard I had to pull over beside a gas station. Not because I missed Dale. Because I realized I had spent half my life loving someone who could watch his own child stand in a hallway terrified and still choose himself. I pulled into my mother's driveway a little after midnight. The rain had finally thinned to mist, and fog hung low over the pasture behind her farmhouse. The porch light was on, casting soft yellow across the gravel like she'd been waiting for me. Maybe she had. I shut off the engine and just sat there gripping the steering wheel. Maddie slept in the passenger seat with her cheek pressed against the window, still holding that stuffed otter under her chin. For one ugly second I almost drove away again. I hadn't lived with my mother since I was 19 years old. And after years of tension between her and Dale, we barely spoke more than twice a year. Dale used to tell me my mother looked down on us. She thinks money makes her smarter than everybody else, he'd say. And over time I stopped calling as often. Stopped visiting. Stopped answering half her messages. Funny how isolation can look exactly like loyalty when you're married to the wrong person. The front door opened before I even got out of the car. My mother stood there in a pale blue robe and reading glasses, arms folded against the cool night air. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her in person. Smaller somehow. But never weak. She took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question. Bring the child inside before she catches pneumonia. That was my mother. No dramatic gasping. No performance. Just movement. I woke Maddie gently and we carried our trash bags up the porch steps like refugees from our own lives. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and lemon furniture polish, exactly the same as when I was a little girl. Maddie stood quietly in the kitchen while my mother heated soup on the stove without speaking. Then she noticed the trash bags. Not luggage. Trash bags. Her eyes flicked toward me once. That was all. You hungry, sweetheart? She asked Maddie softly. Maddie nodded. My mother poured her soup into one of the old ceramic bowls with painted cherries around the rim. The same bowls she'd owned since the 80s. Maddie sat and ate silently while I stood near the sink trying not to completely fall apart. My mother finally looked at me over the rim of her coffee mug. Well, she said calmly. Tell me what that fool did. That was it. That tiny opening. The minute she said it, I started crying so hard I had to sit down. Not graceful crying either. The kind where your chest aches and your nose runs and you can't breathe correctly. I covered my face with both hands. Mom, I whispered. They said we weren't their kind of people anymore. The kitchen went very quiet. My mother slowly removed her glasses. Then she leaned back in her chair and said 4 words I still hear in my head sometimes. Get in the car. But then something unexpected happened. She didn't rush toward revenge. Didn't grab a phone. Didn't start ranting about lawyers. Instead she stood up, refilled my coffee and handed me a dish towel. "Wipe your face," she said. "You look like you lost a bar fight." I laughed through the tears before I could stop myself. And honestly, that tiny laugh probably saved me. Maddie eventually fell asleep on the couch under one of my mother's quilts while the two of us sat at the kitchen table past 1 a.m. I told her everything. About Shelby. About Corinne. About Dale saying the house was his. About the garage. She listened without interrupting once. The only time her expression shifted was when I admitted Dale had been struggling financially for almost a year. "How bad?" she asked. "I don't know exactly." That answer bothered her immediately. "What do you mean you don't know?" I rubbed my forehead. "He handled most of the business stuff." My mother stared at me for a long moment. "Rhonda," she said carefully. "Did you sign anything for him?" I looked down at my coffee and suddenly my stomach dropped. There had been papers. Lots of papers over the years. Business loans. Equipment financing. A line of credit during the pandemic. Dale would bring things home late at night and say things like, "Just routine paperwork." Or, "The bank needs both signatures." Sometimes he'd sound irritated if I asked questions. Once he actually said, "Don't embarrass me in front of people who understand business." At the time I believed supporting your husband meant trusting him. Now I wasn't so certain. My mother saw the panic hit my face. "Oh, honey," she muttered quietly. At 8 the next morning she called Vernon Castellano. Vernon had been friends with my father years ago. 77 years old, Army veteran, suspenders every single day of his life, and somehow permanently smelling like cigars and peppermint. By 10:30 he was sitting at my mother's kitchen table going through old paperwork while muttering under his breath. "Lord have mercy." That's never a reassuring phrase coming from an attorney. I sat across from him twisting my wedding ring around my finger while he flipped through loan documents. Finally he looked up. "Did your husband explain any of this to you?" "Not really." Vernon removed his glasses. "Well, he should have." My mother crossed her arms beside the stove. "How bad?" Vernon tapped one paper. "This right here is a personal guarantee." I blinked. "A what?" "It means if Dale's business sinks, creditors can pursue both of you personally." I felt cold all over. "But he said." Vernon cut me off gently. "I know what he said." The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Outside, one of my mother's horses snorted somewhere near the fence line. Vernon kept going. "There's also a joint business credit line, equipment financing, and this." He held up another paper. "This one concerns me." My mother leaned closer. "What is it?" Vernon frowned. "Large equipment transfers." I didn't understand. He explained slowly. Some of Dale's company property appeared to have been relocated recently. Vehicles. Equipment. Payments routed through different accounts. Some connected to Shelby. My mother's face hardened instantly. "He's hiding assets." Vernon nodded slightly. "Looks that way." I felt sick. Not dramatic sick. Real sick. Like my body understood before my brain did that my marriage hadn't merely fallen apart. It had been quietly rotting for a very long time. My mother looked at me carefully. "Did he isolate you from people?" I stared at her. And for the first time in years I answered honestly. "Yes." That word sat between us a while. Then she sighed softly and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "I never disliked that man because he was poor," she said. "I disliked him because every single year you got a little smaller around him." I couldn't even argue. Because she was right. Around lunchtime, Maddie wandered into the kitchen wearing one of my mother's oversized sweatshirts. She looked sleepy and confused. "Grandma." "Yes, sweetheart. Can I feed the horses later?" My mother smiled for the first time all day. "Course you can." Maddie nodded, then looked at me carefully. That child was watching everything. Children always know more than adults assume. A little later, while Vernon was making copies of documents, Maddie quietly picked up my phone from the kitchen table. I didn't notice until she handed it back 10 minutes later. "What were you doing, baby?" "I deleted Facebook." I blinked. "Why?" He shrugged. "So you stop looking at pictures that make you cry." That nearly broke me all over again. That evening after dinner, my mother stood beside me on the porch while fog rolled over the ridgeline. You listen to me carefully, she said. People like Dale only feel powerful when somebody else feels small. Don't help him by staying broken. I stared out at the dark pasture. I don't even know where to start. She slipped her glasses back on. Yes, you do, she said quietly. You start by understanding this isn't your shame to carry. Inside the house, Maddie laughed at something Vernon said from the kitchen. And for the first time since leaving Huntsville, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt safe. 2 weeks after I arrived at my mother's house, she handed me an apron and told me to stop staring out windows like a widow in an old country song. I'm grieving, I muttered. You're avoiding, she corrected. That was Loretta Whitfield in a nutshell. No patience for self-pity once it stopped being useful. I was standing in her kitchen in fuzzy socks and one of her old cardigans, holding a cup of coffee I'd reheated 3 separate times. Outside, fog rolled over the pasture while Maddie helped feed the horses with one of the neighbor boys. And for a second I almost forgot my entire life had collapsed. Then my phone buzzed. Dale. I let it ring. Buzz again. Then a text came through. You telling people I threw you out? I stared at the screen a moment before typing back. You brought your girlfriend into our house, Dale. What version sounds better to you? No response after that. Just silence. Funny how men disappear the instant you stop begging. Still, the reality of my situation settled heavier every day. Vernon kept uncovering financial messes tied to my name. Loans. Guarantees. Outstanding balances. Apparently, while I'd been clipping grocery coupons and stretching leftover casseroles into second meals, Dale had been quietly moving money around like a man trying to outrun a flood. One afternoon, Vernon spread papers across my mother's dining room table and looked at me over his reading glasses. You need income of your own immediately. I felt embarrassed hearing that at 49 years old. Not because he was wrong. Because he was right. I'd spent so much time supporting Dale's business that somewhere along the way I stopped building any security for myself. That realization stung considerably worse than Shelby did. So 3 weeks later I started working mornings at a truck stop travel center off Interstate 24. If you're not from the South, you may not fully understand the strange emotional grip those places have on people. It's not just a gas station. It's practically a religion with brisket sandwiches. The one outside Chattanooga sat right along the highway, enormous and glowing at 5 in the morning like a beacon for exhausted travelers and retired couples towing RVs. My shift started at 5:30 a.m. in the bakery section. Hairnet, apron, non-slip shoes that made my feet ache halfway through the day. The first morning I cried in the employee bathroom before clocking in. Not loud crying. Just quiet tears while staring at myself under fluorescent lighting thinking, this cannot possibly be my life. Then a woman named Bernice walked in holding a breakfast burrito and caught me sniffling. Bernice was 64, twice divorced, smoked menthols in the parking lot during breaks, and had eyeliner tattooed permanently onto her eyelids sometime around 1999. She looked me up and down. You done? I laughed despite myself. Probably not. Well, she said, unwrapping her burrito, try not to drip mascara into the cinnamon rolls. That was the beginning of our friendship. Over the following weeks, those women slowly stitched me back together without ever once acting like they were doing it. There was Bernice. Rosalind, whose husband ran off with a yoga instructor in Nashville. And Cheryl, who genuinely believed every problem in life could be improved with gravy. One morning while we rolled biscuit dough before sunrise, Bernice finally asked the question everybody already knew the answer to. So what exactly did this fool husband do? I kept working. He brought his girlfriend home. Rosalind stopped buttering trays. To the house. Yes. Bernice blinked slowly. Well, that takes confidence usually reserved for drunk men and raccoons. I laughed so hard I accidentally dropped an entire scoop of dough. That became the rhythm of my days after that. Work, coffee, flour on my jeans, conversations with women who had survived things. And every so often moments where I realized I could still laugh without feeling guilty about it. Nobody there treated me like a tragedy. That was the part that healed me fastest. At the dental office where I'd worked for years, people had known me as Dale's wife. Here nobody knew Dale existed. I was just the woman who showed up on time and could roll dough faster than anyone on the morning shift. Cheryl once told me something I've thought about 100 times since. She was scraping down a sheet pan and said without looking up, "You know what I figured out after my second divorce? Starting over ain't the punishment. Staying was. Maddie started changing too. The first week at my mother's house she barely spoke. She slept curled against the wall like she expected somebody to come take things away again. But little by little she relaxed. She helped my mother water tomatoes in the evenings. Fed horses at the neighboring farm. Started smiling again. One Saturday afternoon I walked outside and found her laughing while trying to brush a stubborn pony named Duke. I stood watching quietly from the porch. My mother stepped beside me holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "She's lighter here," she said softly. I nodded. Then my mother added, "So are you." I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Meanwhile, Dale's life seemed determined to become a social media commercial for bad decisions. Shelby posted constantly. Fancy brunches. Selfies in mirrored elevators. Captions about protecting your peace. One photo showed her standing in my old kitchen wearing one of Dale's flannel shirts while drinking wine out of my grandmother's crystal glass. The caption read, "Some women survive. Some women upgrade." Bernice saw that one during lunch break. She snorted so hard sweet tea nearly came out her nose. "Honey," she said, "any woman quoting a coffee mug while stealing somebody's husband hasn't upgraded. She's on layaway." Even I had to laugh at that. But underneath the humor things were getting uglier financially. Dale called more often now. Not to apologize. To complain. One night he accused me of turning people against him. "All I did was leave," I said. "You're making me look bad." I stood in my mother's kitchen staring at the dark window over the sink. "Dale," I said quietly, "you moved your girlfriend into the house while your daughter watched." He got defensive immediately. "You always exaggerate." "No," I replied. "I just finally stopped covering for you." Silence. Then he hung up. Vernon continued digging through financial records, and one evening he arrived carrying a thick folder under his arm. "Found something interesting." My mother raised an eyebrow. "That usually means expensive." Vernon sat down heavily. "Shelby dated another business owner in Mississippi about 4 years back." I looked up. "What?" "She left when the money dried up." "Did she steal from him?" Vernon shrugged. "Nothing dramatic. Unpaid bills. Maxed cards. Some missing electronics. Mostly she just disappeared." My mother leaned back slowly. "So Dale thinks he won a prize when really he adopted a raccoon." Vernon grinned. "More or less. But the truth was, none of that made me feel victorious yet. Some nights after work I sat in the guest room staring at creditor letters while fear crawled up my throat like smoke. What if Dale ruined us completely? What if I spent the next decade cleaning up debt I didn't even understand? One morning at work I locked myself in the bathroom after receiving another notice in the mail. I sat on the closed toilet lid wearing a hairnet and apron, crying quietly into paper towels. 49 years old, working a truck stop bakery, buried in debt because I trusted my husband. A knock came at the door. Bernice's voice floated through. "You alive in there?" "Barely." She sighed dramatically. "Honey, I don't know what man caused this situation, but I hope he gets audited by Jesus." I laughed so suddenly it startled me. Then I wiped my face, fixed my apron and walked back out. And somewhere between the cinnamon rolls, the legal paperwork and my daughter feeding horses in the hills, I started understanding something important. Dale hadn't destroyed me. He had simply forced me to finally see how much of myself I'd been giving away. By the time October arrived, the leaves around Chattanooga had turned copper and gold. Tourists crowded the scenic overlooks every weekend taking photographs like they'd personally invented autumn. Meanwhile I spent most mornings making biscuits and most evenings sitting at my mother's kitchen table sorting legal paperwork with Vernon. That became my life for a while. Not glamorous. Not inspiring. Just steady. And honestly, steady started feeling considerably better than exciting. Then Corinne called. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity gets stronger with age, not weaker. I picked up while standing in the baking aisle at the grocery store holding a bag of flour. Her voice came smooth and sugary as artificial sweetener. "Rhonda, I wanted to let you know Dale will be attending the North Alabama Children's Hospital Gala next month." I waited. "Well," she continued carefully, "people in Huntsville do talk. I thought it would be easier for everyone if you stayed away." I actually smiled. Not because it was funny. Because after everything that had happened, Corinne still believed appearances were the same thing as reality. "Corinne," I said calmly, If your son's behavior embarrasses you, that sounds like a family issue. Then I hung up. That night my mother listened quietly while I described the call. We were shelling pecans at the kitchen table while Maddie worked on math homework nearby. Loretta didn't even look up. We're going. I blinked. To the gala? Of course. I'm not going there. Yes, you are. I laughed nervously. Mom, those people already think I'm pathetic. She finally raised her eyes. Honey, you worked 30 years, raised a child, survived betrayal, and rebuilt your life from nothing. The pathetic people are the ones pretending infidelity is sophistication. Maddie looked up from her homework. What's sophistication? My mother answered immediately. Something rich people confuse with cruelty. Vernon arrived 2 days later carrying another folder thick enough to stop a bullet. He dropped it onto the dining room table. Well, he said, your ex-son-in-law may officially be the dumbest businessman in Madison County. He's not my ex-son-in-law yet, my mother replied. Vernon shrugged. Emotionally, he's deceased. Turns out Dale had been attempting to secure new investment for his company while quietly moving equipment and money through accounts connected to Shelby. Not illegal on the surface, but suspicious enough that once people started asking questions, things got uncomfortable very quickly. Vernon prepared formal legal notices regarding the debt exposure tied to my name and sent copies to Dale's attorney, his accountant, and several business contacts. One of those contacts happened to sit on the board organizing the hospital gala. That mattered. Not because Vernon wanted public humiliation. Because wealthy people despise financial scandal at charity events. Especially Southern wealthy people. There's nothing on earth they fear more than embarrassment near a shrimp tower. The gala was held on a Saturday evening at the Huntsville Country Club. I almost backed out 3 separate times that afternoon. At one point I stood in my mother's guest room staring at myself in the mirror thinking maybe Corinne had been right. Maybe I should simply stay invisible. But then Maddie walked in wearing a pale green dress my mother had bought her and said, "You look nice, Mom." That nearly undid me. Because for months my daughter had watched me cry, watched me panic over bills, watched me doubt myself. And now she was looking at me like maybe I wasn't broken anymore. So I took a breath and finished getting dressed. Nothing flashy. Simple charcoal dress, low heels, my mother's pearl earrings. When I came downstairs, Loretta looked me over carefully. "You don't need sparkle," she said. "You brought receipts." Even Vernon laughed at that. The country club looked exactly the way places like that always do. Soft lighting. White tablecloths. Women pretending not to judge each other while absolutely judging each other. The second we walked inside, I felt eyes swing toward me. Whispers moved through the room like wind through dry grass. I spotted Dale near the bar almost immediately. And honestly, he looked older. Not physically. Spiritually. Like stress had finally started collecting payment. Then I saw Shelby beside him in a tight burgundy dress, holding a champagne flute like she'd practiced the pose in a mirror. Corinne stood nearby greeting people with the desperate smile of a woman trying to hold a collapsing picture framed together with tape. Dale noticed me first. His entire body stiffened. Shelby turned next. For half a second, genuine panic crossed her face before she replaced it with that sweet fake smile again. "Well," she said brightly as we approached. "Rhonda. You look comfortable." I smiled politely. "And you look expensive. I hope somebody kept the receipt." Vernon coughed violently into his hand to disguise a laugh. Even Loretta smirked. Corinne stepped forward immediately. "This really isn't the place for unpleasantness." My mother answered before I could. "Corinne, bless your heart. You still think silence and dignity are the same thing." Dale already looked exhausted. "Can we not do this tonight?" Vernon adjusted his suspenders calmly. "That depends entirely on your financial records." Dale's face changed instantly. Fear. Real fear. Before he could respond, a tall older man approached holding a bourbon glass. Sterling Boyd. Local investor, known throughout Huntsville for donating hospital wings and firing people without blinking. "Dale," Sterling said casually, "I received some concerning paperwork this afternoon." The room around us seemed to quiet slightly. Dale forced a laugh. "Sterling, now's probably not the time." "I disagree," Sterling replied. "Especially since your company sponsored tonight's event." Shelby shifted uncomfortably beside him. Sterling continued calmly. "Is it true company assets were transferred while debt tied to your wife remained active?" Nobody spoke. Not even Corinne. Dale glanced toward me, then Vernon, then back to Sterling. It's being handled. That's not what I asked. A few nearby guests had gone completely silent now. One woman slowly lowered her wine glass halfway to her mouth and never finished the sip. Vernon stepped forward and handed Dale a sealed envelope. Formal notice, he said quietly. Dale stared at it like it was radioactive. Shelby suddenly grabbed his arm. You told me everything was already settled. Shelby. No. Her voice climbed. You said the business was fine. Corinne hissed under her breath. Lower your voice. Shelby turned on her immediately. Don't start with me, Corinne. Your son promised me things too. And there was. Once it opened, everything started falling through. Sterling stepped back slowly. A couple across the room pretended to examine auction items while very obviously listening. Dale looked at me desperately. Rhonda, can we talk privately? For a moment, old instincts kicked in. The urge to protect him. To smooth things over. 23 years doesn't disappear overnight. But then I remembered Maddie standing in that hallway clutching her stuffed otter while her father chose another woman over her peace. And something inside me settled calmly. Finally. You spent years teaching me to survive disappointment, I told him quietly. Looks like I learned. Dale swallowed hard. I never wanted this. I looked around the room. At Shelby. At Corinne. At the investors drifting away one by one. Then back at him. Yes, I said softly. You did. Right then Maddie walked past us holding my mother's hand. Dale's expression cracked completely. Maddie. She paused for half a second. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just tired. Then she kept walking. And somehow that silence hit harder than anything else said all night. Winter arrived early that year. By mid-November, mornings in the mountains carried that sharp cold that settles into your bones before sunrise. I'd gotten used to waking around 4:30 without an alarm. Years of worrying will train your body better than any clock ever could. Most mornings I stood alone in my mother's kitchen tying on an apron while biscuit dough rested beneath a dish towel beside the stove. The house always sounded different before dawn. Heater humming quietly. Floorboards creaking softly. Coffee dripping into the pot one slow drop at a time. Peace has small sounds when you haven't heard it in a very long time. Maddie usually came downstairs around 6:30 before school, sleepy-eyed and wrapped in oversized sweatshirts. She'd started laughing more by then. Sleeping through the night too. That mattered more to me than anything happening to Dale. And plenty was happening to Dale. Not all at once. Real life rarely collapses in one dramatic explosion. Comes apart gradually. Bills first. Then reputation. Then the people who only loved your success. Vernon kept me updated on the legal situation roughly every week. Dale's business lost 2 commercial contracts after word spread about the financial investigation. Creditors started circling harder after discovering equipment transfers tied to outside accounts. The house in Huntsville eventually had to be listed for sale. Apparently Shelby was furious about that. According to Vernon, she'd believed Dale was considerably wealthier than he actually was, which honestly explained a great deal. One afternoon while I was boxing pecan pie orders for a local coffee shop, Vernon stopped by carrying his usual stack of folders. He accepted coffee, sat heavily at the kitchen table and sighed. Well, he announced. Miss Shelby has officially evacuated the battlefield. My mother looked up from clipping coupons. She left. Packed up and vanished sometime Tuesday. I kept sealing pie boxes quietly. Vernon continued. Took a television, a designer handbag Dale apparently financed like a fool, and possibly a set of expensive golf clubs. My mother snorted softly. Nature is healing. Even I laughed at that. Not cruelly. Just tired. Because somewhere along the way Dale had stopped feeling like the love of my life and started feeling like a man sprinting through a storm carrying gasoline. Every bad decision fed the next one. A week later Corinne finally called me directly. Not to argue. Not to defend Dale. To apologize. I stared at the voicemail notification for nearly an hour before listening to it. Her voice sounded older somehow. Smaller. Rhonda, I suppose I owe you an apology. I handled things poorly. Maddie didn't deserve, she paused. None of it should have happened the way it did. That was as close to accountability as Corinne would probably ever come. My mother looked at me while I held the phone silently. You going to answer? I thought about it then shook my head. No. Good. Not because I hated Corinne. I didn't anymore. Hatred requires energy I no longer wanted to spend. The truth was simpler than that. I was finished caring about people who only loved me when I made their lives easier. That winter my little baking side business slowly started growing. Nothing enormous. Just enough. Words spread through church groups and local community pages about the lady with the cinnamon rolls. Every Friday morning I delivered boxes to a coffee shop downtown near the riverfront. The owner, a woman named Delphine, started requesting extra biscuits because they kept selling out before noon. One snowy morning she handed me cash and said, "You know these remind people of their grandmothers, right?" I smiled. "That's probably the butter." "No," she said softly. "It's the comfort." That stayed with me. Because comfort was something I used to think came from stability. Marriage. Routine. A house. But standing there covered in flour at 49 years old, rebuilding my life one pie crust at a time, I realized comfort actually comes from safety and honesty and waking up without fear sitting on your chest. That realization took me a very long time to earn. The strangest part was that healing didn't happen dramatically either. There wasn't one magical morning where I suddenly felt strong. It came in pieces. The first time I laughed without guilt. The first paycheck I earned entirely for myself. The first night I realized I hadn't thought about Shelby once all day. The first morning Maddie stopped checking my face to see whether I'd been crying. Those tiny moments matter far more than revenge ever does. Even my relationship with my mother slowly changed. One evening near Christmas, we sat together on the porch wrapped in blankets while snow dusted the pasture fence. "I should have listened to you years ago," I admitted quietly. Loretta shook her head. "No. You should have listened to yourself years ago." That one hit deep because she was right. There had been signs. So many signs. The criticism. The isolation. The way Dale slowly made my world smaller while convincing me it was love. But hindsight is a sharp knife. No point sleeping with it. A few days after New Year's, Vernon called with another update. "Dale's renting a duplex outside Decatur now." I stared out the kitchen window while he talked. "He asks about Maddie every time." That hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, part of me still remembered the younger version of Dale. The man who taught Maddie how to ride a bike. The man who held my hand when my father died. People don't become monsters all at once. Sometimes they just keep choosing selfishness until there's nothing decent left standing. That grief stayed complicated. Maybe it always will. One morning near the end of January, I was rolling biscuit dough before sunrise when I noticed my wedding ring sitting in the little ceramic dish beside the sink. I'd taken it off months earlier without thinking, but there it still sat. Gold dulled slightly under the kitchen light. For a long moment I just stared at it. 23 years. A child. An entire life. Then I picked it up carefully and placed it inside a plain white envelope. On the front I wrote 2 words. Old life. Maddie wandered downstairs a minute later, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at the envelope. "What's that?" I smiled a little. "Just something I don't need to carry anymore." She nodded like she understood more than a child should. Then she wrapped her arms around my waist while biscuit dough covered my hands. "Are we okay now?" she asked softly. I looked around the kitchen. At the flour on the counter. At the early morning light creeping through the windows. At my mother humming somewhere upstairs. And for the first time in a very long while the answer came easily. "No, baby," I said. "We're better than okay. We're honest." If you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, especially later in life, then you already know healing doesn't happen quickly. But it does happen. Quietly. Piece by piece. And sometimes the hardest endings make room for the most peaceful beginnings. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear where you found your strength. And if you'd like more stories like this one, stay a while.